Victoria De Francesco Soto from Latino Decisions is back with us at the table. And back in 2009, President Obama promised to make investigating those responsible for the housing crisis a top priority of his administration. 3 years later, it's hard to say that that promise has been met. On Tuesday, however, President Obama announced a new Justice Department task force to investigate mortgage and securitization fraud.
I'm asking my Attorney General to create a special unit of federal prosecutors and leading state attorney general to expand our investigations into the abuse of lending and packaging of risky mortgages that led to the housing crisis. This new unit will hold accountable those who broke the law, speed assistance to homeowners, and help turn the page on an era of recklessness that hurt so many Americans.
On Friday, the Justice Department announced that they had issued civil subpoenas to 11 financial institutions. And today, it's my great pleasure to welcome to the program one of the co-chairs of the new investigative unit, New York Attorney General Eric Schneiderman. Mr. Schneiderman, thanks so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Chris. Eric's fine.
I want to start. This is difficult. In the abstract, I think people understand. There was a lot that happened during the housing bubble and the securitization machine that was fraudulent, that was misleading to investors and also to the people on the receiving ends of loans, and that ultimately precipitated the crash. But I want to be a little specific about the timeline here, because for the people that have been following the story, as I have very closely, your name being announced by the president to this task force had a lot of resonance and meaning because of the backstory. So I want to step back to the backstory, which is every state attorney general started investigations, opened up investigations of the bank's foreclosure practices. Can you explain to people why you decided to start an investigation, why all the other attorneys general started those investigations?
Well, I got elected I took office a year or so ago, and one of the crises we were facing immediately was this wave of foreclosures. We have 15 million families in America that are underwater. They owe more on their homes than the homes are worth. 5 million families have been foreclosed on already, millions more in the pipeline. So this is an immediate problem for attorneys general, for governors, for everyone all over America who are dealing with these issues. My concern was that what the investigations that were underway, it's very important to focus on abuses in the foreclosure process. It's also important to get back to the conduct that blew up the economy. And my concern always was we not release claims for the actual misconduct. Look, robo-signing is bad. Foreclosure abuses are bad. But the housing bubble and the crash that brought down the American economy, threw millions of people out of work, and really just exacerbated the gap between the middle class and the wealthy, that was man-made conduct. This was a man-made disaster. This was not a tidal wave or sunspots, as some would have it. And the goal of our investigation has always been accountability for those who blew up the economy, relief for those who were harmed, and also just to stop these guys from rewriting history. Because quite honestly, the reckless deregulation that caused this crisis, it was caused by greed and recklessness in the private sector, too, but that was enabled by the reckless deregulation. You listen to some of the rhetoric in the presidential campaign on the Republican side, they're dishing out the same recipe for disaster that just blew up the economy a few years ago.
In terms of the foreclosures that attorneys general found themselves facing their state, there was a lot of evidence that started to come out that the banks that were foreclosing actually didn't have the proper legal title to the home. They didn't have the bank note, the loan. And in order to get away with that, there was a robo-signing scandal, which was banks were hiring people to sign affidavits saying, don't worry, we have the loan, don't you worry, we're going to foreclose on you. The fact that the note was missing was the rotten fruit of a poisoned tree, right? Because the actual entire securitization chain of custody and the entire means by which loans at the point of sale were converted into mortgage-backed securities, which were then packaged together and sold, the actual chain of custody, the legal chain of custody, was when the securitization machine got really ramped up, sort of fell apart, right?
Well, this is what we're investigating, and the joint investigation that we kicked off on Friday you need three things to do this right. You need the jurisdiction and the combination of agencies now working together. For the first time, I'm confident we have the jurisdiction to cover every aspect of the conduct that brought about the bubble and the crash. You need the resources, and I'm confident we've got the commitment of resources. We will have, before this is over, there are going to be hundreds of people in the different constituent elements of the joint investigation working on this. And you need the will. And I got to tell you, the president's commitment, his language in the State of the Union, followed up by what Attorney General Holder announced and my interaction with my other colleagues, we have the will to pursue this. So it's very important to step back, as you're saying, and consider the implications of things that are coming up in foreclosure proceedings for the bubble and the crash. Back in a decade ago, a mortgage-backed security was a good investment. Just a pool of mortgages, you buy a share of the income stream from the mortgages. Everyone had 30-year fixed-rate mortgages. I had a 30-year fixed-rate mortgage. And America was still in this lend-and-hold model. The bank lent you the money, the bank held the mortgage, you paid off the bank that lent it to you. It changed into what you just called the securitization machine. The point wasn't to finance people to buy homes. The point was to pour as many mortgages as you could, as fast as you could, into these trusts, sell off the shares, go get more mortgages. And there was almost an element of desperation that took over, and the need for speed created sloppiness, and that's a lot of what we're investigating. And that's where you see things like mortgages not getting properly deposited into trusts, or mortgages that didn't meet the requirements for the trust. And the implications of this go way beyond the securities fraud, which is a lot of people are focused on. If you didn't have all of the mortgages in the trust, when you went to the monoline insurers and said, please insure us, there are implications for insurance fraud. When you went to the taxing authorities and said, we want to have the tax status so this trust is not taxed twice, tax fraud is a possibility. The fact that we've now got the IRS on this joint investigation, the fact that we've got the new Consumer Financial Protection Bureau with Rich Cordray and his people in on this, we have the team we need to dig in on every aspect of this, where there are cases where in New York our statute of limitations is short, so you can't go back far enough in time. The federal statutes are longer. The combination of folks and agencies who are in this joint investigation really give me confidence that we're going to be able to get at every aspect of this.
I want to ask some more details about how this investigation is going to work, how the task force you've been charged with is going to work as well, right after we take this break. Here with Attorney General from New York, Eric Schneiderman, just named by President Barack Obama to the joint investigation of housing fraud. And I wanted to ask you about this. When your name was announced at the State of the Union, it made a lot of news in the circle of people that follow this, like I was saying. And the reason is this. There had been these 50 investigations initiated by every Attorney General. There was a process by which a settlement was being negotiated. Tom Miller, who was the Attorney General from Iowa, was heading that up. And there was a lot of fear that that settlement was going to be way too lenient on the banks and release them essentially from accountability, legally release them. And there were attorneys general, yourself was one of them, Beau Biden, who's had a guest on the program, Kamala Harris from California, who basically objected and said, no, we want to make sure that there is accountability. So when your name came up as the person that had this task force, there were two theories. One was that Attorney General Eric Schneiderman has won, and the other was Attorney General Eric Schneiderman has been co-opted by the White House. So I want to give you an opportunity to say which of those two it is.
I don't. None of the above. I mean, this is not an example of me winning, but you did frame up the issue when I got elected. The multi-state negotiations which were going on, which have to do again with post-crash misconduct. This has to do with abuses in the foreclosure process, not with what my working group is investigating, which is the conduct that blew up the economy in the first place. And there was a negotiation underway, and when I first came in, the banks understand. And look, I spent 15 years in a corporate law firm. I used to represent Merrill Lynch and other financial institutions. I'm familiar with this area, and I'm familiar with these guys. They wanted as broad a release as they could get. If I was representing them, I would too. They wanted a release from all their misconduct in return for settling claims. It really had to do with a relatively narrow set of issues: robo-signing, foreclosure abuse. It's good to have a servicing settlement. I've never objected to that. You want harder rules of the road going forward. You want principal reduction for homeowners. There was a lot of good stuff in that settlement. I drew a hard line, though, and said there's absolutely no way I'm going to join if you're going to give these guys a release from the other conduct that hasn't even been investigated yet, or the investigations are underway but haven't come to fruition. First rule of responsible prosecution: you don't release claims that haven't been investigated. So I drew a line on that, but it really wasn't about me winning.
Sure.
There was this incredible public outcry from activist groups like Move On and the coalition of housing activists, civil rights groups, progressive members of Congress, like our colleague here, and labor, organized labor, absolutely adamant that you do not release the claims for the conduct that blew up the economy. And so I'm very confident now that whatever releases might be granted in the servicing settlement that's being negotiated are not going to impede our investigation. We didn't all stand up there on Friday and say we're investigating all of the conduct that blew up the economy with the thought in mind that in a few weeks from now we're going to release all the claims we just said we're investigating. That's not happening. That is the president has been absolutely clear. We're going after the stuff that blew up the economy in our working group. We're going after the possibilities of tax fraud, insurance fraud, securities fraud. We're going to look at this stuff very carefully. We have the jurisdiction, we have the resources, we have the will. And then the servicing settlement is designed to deal with the day-to-day problems people are facing with foreclosure abuse. And I know Congressman Cohen has been pushing for provisions to mandate mediation between lenders and homeowners. That sort of stuff has to take place, but that's really very separate from the issues we're looking at.
In terms of the resources, our staff was doing some research, and I was surprised to see on the FBI, we were going through the FBI's website, during the savings and loan investigation, the FBI had 1,000 members of the FBI, 1,000 members of the FBI tasked to it. During the Enron investigation, which was just one company, 40 FBI investigators were tasked with that investigation. What kind of staff are you going to have? The initial reports I've seen have said 10 FBI agents, but I'm imagining that's not the whole kit and caboodle. But when you say resources, what kind of scale are we talking about? Because as you've noted, this is very complex stuff. These are presumably, if there are going to be civil or criminal cases brought, these are very, very difficult cases to bring. There's a massive paper trail, a tremendous amount of technical legal knowledge that has to be marshaled, tons of documents to go through. What kind of scale of resources are you really going to have?
We're going to have, I don't know exactly, but I'm sure there'll be hundreds of people working on it. It's important to understand that the joint investigation is not structured to stop any of us from bringing our own cases. Right. My office will be bringing cases in the course of the next few weeks that are coordinated with our colleagues, but the people in my office who have been working on this for the last 8 months aren't stopping work just because we've now got a joint investigation. Attorney General Holder had an initial commitment that he announced to the core of the working group of 55 people, agents and lawyers, and we're going to be adding to that. That's just from the Civil Division of the Justice Department. We also have folks from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. We have people from U.S. attorneys' offices. U.S. Attorney Walsh from Colorado is another one of the co-chairs to help coordinate the activities of the U.S. attorneys' offices. So we're going to have hundreds of people working on this, but more importantly, the overlay of jurisdiction of these different entities is what guarantees our ability to inquire into everything. Every mortgage-backed security issued in the last decade was either a New York trust or a Delaware trust. You mentioned Attorney General Biden. He and I started collaborating when we realized that we had jurisdiction over these trusts and that the investor claims that have to be resolved at some point, the people who bought these mortgage-backed securities only to see them collapse, they have to come through New York and Delaware to do it. Our jurisdiction, Justice, the SEC, the IRS, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, huge addition to the team. Look at the entities that are in this working group, and the lawyers who are looking at this now, and particularly my good friends and colleagues who represent financial services institutions, they understand the implications of this combination of resources and forces.
More with Attorney General Eric Schneiderman and my guests here when we come back after this.
The too big to fail banks believe, this is me just speaking, believe that many of us on the enforcement side are as scared or more scared than they are of peeling back this onion.
Delaware Attorney General Beau Biden, a colleague of yours, I think it's fair to say, and he was a guest on our show. That's him speaking to my colleague Dylan Radigan. The big question, we've gone into the weeds a little bit, and I thank you for tolerating that. The big question is, why haven't we seen any accountability? I mean, I think this is the head-scratching question in some ways that defines our era. You look around and you see, this is not a nation that has a problem with putting people in jail. Heck, we put more people in jail than any other country in the OECD. This is not a nation that doesn't have a lot of smart prosecutors. We've got tons of smart prosecutors. How is it the case that 3 years later, essentially no one at the top has been held to account?
There are a lot of investigations that have been underway. There are a lot of resources that have been brought to bear. But there has been a tension. There are folks in state government, there are folks in local law enforcement, there are folks in the federal government who are hungry to go after the the misconduct that caused the crash. And there are a lot of pieces in place already, so we're not writing on a blank slate. There are a lot of private litigants that have developed information that we're going to be able to use in the joint investigation. I think that the clarity the President provided this past week really was that we are going to step up on the principle of one set of rules for everyone, equal justice under law. You can't have some institutions that are protected by the law, not allowed to fail, and not held to account, and all the other institutions and companies in America are allowed to fail. You can't have equal justice under law and have too big to fail, and that's really where we were stepping up this week.
And the trouble is we literally have unequal justice, and we literally have a whole group of people that were allowed to fail and literally fall flat on their faces. So this is my question. There have been so many investigations, and you're saying you have this remit and this staff and the clarity from the President. 2 words, jail time. Like, will there be corporate criminal responsibility? Are people going to be behind bars? Because there's a real sense that might this just be more of that wonderful State of the Union that's a fighting president on the side of the 99%, but actually, substantively, it's been about protecting the 1%.
Well, I think, first of all, we're in an ongoing investigation, and I can't get into the details. Certainly, the folks who have the criminal jurisdiction are a part of our working group. We all have the ability. The New York securities law, the Martin Act, is more flexible in some ways than the federal securities law. So, again, the combination of resources should tell you that we are looking at possible criminal liability, civil liability, and an array of things that I've already mentioned. But I think the important thing to understand is this is not just about the President. This is about the American people having risen up over the course of the last year. The political atmosphere right now is so different than it was when I started this conflict over giving the banks a release a year ago. And that's not because of me, and that's not because of Congressman Cohen. That's because of the grassroots uprising that's taken place across this country. Equal justice under law is the essential differentiating factor between the United States and all of the aristocracies and monarchies that were around when this country was formed. I realize you have some congressional colleagues who think we should go back to Europe. We're not taking equal justice under law back anywhere. That's American. That is quintessentially American, and that's really what we're stepping up on. So everything is on the table. The investigation, we started the joint working group on Friday, so I can't comment on actual results yet. But in the next few weeks, I think you will see indications that this is an active investigation going forward. You will see more subpoenas. 11 were announced on Friday. You will see action by other agencies. You will see cases being filed.
Is there a timeline to it?
No, there's no timeline, but I assure you if we don't have some concrete results within the next 6-8 months, I'm going to be very disappointed.
Congressman.
Esther asks, and I understand it from the public's perspective, you want to see people in jail. And Bob Dylan had a great line: you steal a little and they put you in jail, you steal a lot and they make you the king. Right. Well, I don't necessarily want to see anybody in jail. I want to see deferred prosecution agreements to where these corporate criminals have to do some restitution and some remedies to the homeowners, which I think is what you want to see, and to see them reduce principal and work as we've tried to do to get them to mediate. And that's what you get. Putting them in jail, that's great. You see a picture and there's stripes and they're picking up litter or something. But making sure that the people who are underwater get to, a little...
But what about both? Why can't it be both happen? As opposed to one or the other. There should be restitution, absolutely, because of the billions of people have lost. But shouldn't they also pay for their criminality? Well, that's also part of the American way, isn't it?
They should, and I have no problem. Don't let me be the defender of the crooks. But the big thing is getting the homeowners relief, and that's what you get in the DPAs.
It's key to our economic recovery. A couple weeks ago, a report came out by the Fed, who usually doesn't get involved in dictating policy or suggestions, and they said, if we want to get out of this economic well we're in, we need to fix the housing crisis. We need to get people back into their homes. We need to figure out a way to pump that money back in. And so we're working at it from all sides. And I think while we want to see the criminals put away, let's not forget about the people who are being foreclosed on.
I want to say something, though, about this question of jail, and because I think this is important. There's two things that are happening, I think, that sort of produce the securitization machine that produces the crisis. One of them is deregulation and expanding the realm of things that are legal, right? And the Fed was asleep at the switch. I mean, people were going and meeting with the Fed saying lending standards are degrading. There's all these things you need to do. You can enforce tougher standards. They didn't do it. So there was an expansion of what was legal, but there was also, and I'm not a prosecutor, but from what the research I've done, it seems a lot of illegal activity. I mean, people were doing things they knew were fraudulent. They were passing paper they knew was no good. And I think in terms of this notion of what will prevent the next crash, I think seeing someone go to jail who is one of your colleagues has a more profound deterrent effect on the future of our financial system in many respects than passing something like Dodd-Frank in certain ways, because it's personal and it's human, and people that are at the wheel need to know that they're going to be held responsible. New York State Attorney General Eric Schneiderman, new co-chair of the Task Force on Mortgage Fraud. Thank you for taking so much time this morning. I really, really appreciate it.
Pleasure. Thank you.